The street was quiet. It was late. She had no idea someone was waiting for her in the shadows. Within seconds, the calm was shattered. There was a sudden noise, a shift in her voice, and then silence. What followed was so violent, so planned, that investigators were left stunned. But the most disturbing part? She had warned everyone this could happen, and no one stopped it. Born and raised in Italy, Alessandra Matteuzzi had spent most of her life immersed in the world of fashion. At 56, she worked as a sales representative for a boutique that specialized in women's clothing. Those who knew her best described her as dependable, thoughtful, and refined. She brought precision and grace to everything she did, whether it was assisting a client or caring for a loved one. Alessandra was known for her deep compassion. Her sense of responsibility extended beyond her career. For years, she had been her father's primary caregiver during his final illness, offering unwavering support until his death. The experience left her emotionally drained. After his passing, she withdrew socially, turning inward and hesitating to pursue new relationships. Her mother, who lived in a care home and needed constant assistance, became the center of her daily life. Alessandra maintained a steady routine that included frequent visits to her mother and daily phone calls with her younger sister Stefania, with whom she shared an unshakable bond. Despite her reserved nature, Alessandra maintained an online presence. Her social media accounts revealed glimpses of a peaceful, structured life, photos from family gatherings, elegant outfits from work, and quiet moments at home with her pet. She was not reclusive, but she preferred calm settings and meaningful connections over large crowds or spontaneous socializing. Her world had become smaller, yet it remained deeply personal and intimate. That world shifted in the summer of 2021. It began, like many modern connections do, through social media. Alessandra came across the profile of a young man named Giovanni Padovani. Born in Sicily, Padovani was 26 years old and living a very different life. A professional football player with a side career in modeling, he was active and widely followed online. His posts often featured training clips, travel photos, and behind-the-scenes looks at photo shoots. His digital persona was polished, charming, and widely admired, especially by women. There was nothing about his profile that appeared suspicious. If anything, his openness and approachable tone gave the impression of someone self-assured but grounded. Despite their significant age gap, the initial interaction between Alessandra and Giovanni unfolded with surprising ease. He was respectful and kind, never dismissive or arrogant. Over time, their messages grew more frequent, moving from simple greetings to longer exchanges about daily life and personal thoughts. As their digital conversations evolved into real emotional exchanges, the bond deepened. They communicated almost daily, sharing photos, life updates, and words of encouragement. Eventually, Giovanni arranged to visit Alessandra in person. He traveled to Bologna, where she lived, and spent several days getting to know her in her own environment. He was gentle, observant, and never overstepped. One gesture in particular stood out. He offered to visit Alessandra's mother at the care home. That moment, simple yet meaningful, left a lasting impression. It suggested that he wasn't merely interested in Alessandra, but in the life she had built and the people she loved. In the months that followed, Giovanni continued to visit Bologna. He and Alessandra shared quiet moments, walking through the city, cooking meals, running errands together. He accompanied her in her routines and seemed to enjoy the slower pace of her world. He appeared to care deeply, capturing moments together in photos he sometimes posted online. In private messages, he offered her encouragement and affection. To those observing from the outside, it may have seemed like an unexpected but tender relationship, two very different lives finding common ground. But not long after the new year, that sense of security began to unravel. Padovani's tone shifted. He began calling more often, sometimes several times a day, and his questions became unusually specific. What once felt like affectionate curiosity turned into suspicion. He demanded to know whom she was speaking with, what she was doing, and why. Their chats transformed into interrogations, laced with doubt. Then came the accusations. He insisted she was hiding things from him, details, people, conversations. None of it had any foundation. His fixation didn't stop with Alessandra. He started calling Stefania directly, attempting to convince her of his distorted view of reality. He pleaded for her support, but as his behavior grew more erratic, his tone shifted from persuasion to aggression. Stefania remembered him yelling during phone calls, his voice raised, accusations flying. She eventually made the difficult decision to cut contact altogether. Alessandra, on the other hand, held on. She believed the storm would pass. She didn't argue or provoke. Instead, she tried to calm things, to restore balance. But the man who had once seemed so emotionally in tune began pushing further into her life. His jealousy took root. Casual social media activity, likes, photos, comments, triggered new rounds of conflict. He demanded explanations for even the smallest digital interactions. As his obsession grew, so did his need to control. He started calling at all hours of the night. His messages, once sweet, became a torrent, urgent, aimless, and constant, sometimes angry, sometimes apologetic. Alessandra's peace was shattered. His mood swings were exhausting, his expectations impossible. And yet, he continued to embed himself into her life in increasingly invasive ways. In early 2022, the situation escalated. After one of his visits, Alessandra noticed something was wrong with her digital accounts. She had been locked out of her email and social media profiles. Attempts to recover them revealed that the new passwords contained clues, phrases, and references connected directly to Giovanni. She suspected he had accessed her computer. The deeper she looked, the worse it became. Her WhatsApp account had been linked to a foreign device, and spyware was later discovered on her phone. This software wasn't just for monitoring, it gave Giovanni the ability to read her messages, review her call logs, and track her location in real time. His surveillance wasn't incidental, it was systematic and deliberate. That suspicion was confirmed when he began referencing private conversations, ones Alessandra had never shared with him. He knew who she had talked to and when. He confronted her with twisted interpretations of her digital interactions, convinced she was being unfaithful, even in the absence of any evidence. The intensity of his delusions only grew. He demanded proof of her whereabouts, short videos sent every 10 minutes. These clips were meant to verify where she was and who she was with. Refusing to comply brought out his rage. He'd threaten to end the relationship, accuse her of betrayal, or bombard her with messages until she gave in. His tone became cold, authoritarian. Alessandra no longer felt like a participant in the relationship. She felt surveilled, evaluated, and trapped. Then came the most chilling revelation. Giovanni had somehow gained access to her home surveillance system. A screenshot he shared in a message to his mother, a still image of Alessandra from inside her apartment, confirmed it. He had been watching her, live, inside the place she once considered safe. The violation was total. By mid-2022, Giovanni's behavior had turned openly predatory. He wasn't just watching online, he began following her in person. He loitered near her apartment building in Bologna, appearing at odd hours without warning. Neighbors noticed. One resident spotted him trying to enter the complex. Another saw him on the roof. He was no longer hiding his intentions. Alessandra warned her neighbors not to open the door for him. Her life was now ruled by anxiety. He had become unpredictable, volatile. And then came the damage. Her car was tampered with, its lights disabled by cut wiring. Her apartment lost power after someone had removed the fuses. These weren't just acts of vandalism. They were calculated provocations designed to force her into physical proximity with him. There were sounds of shouting, heavy thuds against her walls, items in her home smashed or broken. At one point, he climbed back onto the roof, attempting another break-in. His jealousy, once disguised as affection, had spiraled into obsession. All boundaries had been obliterated. The woman who had once lived a quiet, structured life, rooted in routine, family, and compassion, was now living in a state of constant fear. Alessandra was no longer in a relationship. She was being hunted. She began carrying pepper spray. It was a small shift, but for a woman who had once lived with grace and self-assurance, it marked a major emotional rupture. Fear had settled into every part of her day. She told friends and family that returning home filled her with anxiety. Occasionally, she found refuge at her sister Stefania's house, though the temporary relief never lasted. Her dog remained behind in the apartment, and for Alessandra, leaving him behind entirely wasn't an option. That emotional tether forced her back, again and again, into the orbit of danger. Between July and August, the situation became increasingly volatile. Alessandra confided in Stefania, sharing incidents of intimidation and escalating aggression. Still, even amid the fear, she continued looking for ways to diffuse the situation. She avoided direct confrontation, perhaps hoping that silence or calm might blunt the obsession. But Giovanni responded to her distance not with withdrawal, but with escalation. He took it as an affront, something that needed correcting. On July 29, 2022, Alessandra made her first formal move toward protection. She filed a police report documenting Giovanni's obsessive behavior, the repeated intrusions into her privacy, and his increasingly erratic presence around her home. She came prepared, with screenshots of messages, photos of him near her residence, and details of the stalking that had defined her recent months. But no urgent measures were taken. Days passed. The fear didn't subside. On August 3rd, she returned to the police with new evidence, additional sightings, further interference. Once again, she shared her concerns. But the case remained in an early phase. Investigators noted her claims but made no protective recommendations. There was no restraining order, no formal warning, no police presence near her building. By August 8th, she was back again. The harassment hadn't stopped. Giovanni continued to appear near her home and attempted to enter the building. She documented each new incident, the car damage, the power disruptions, and the attempted break-ins. His messages were growing more hostile. Still, the official response remained unchanged. A fourth visit came on August 13th. Alessandra, by then, was exhausted and terrified. She was being watched, followed, and digitally tracked. Giovanni's control extended into her private communications and daily routines. She made it clear she feared for her life. She gave police direct quotes from his messages, words filled with threats and psychological manipulation. One of her statements stood out with horrifying clarity. "I don't want to die." It was more than a plea. It was a warning. But even this wasn't enough to spur decisive action. Authorities pointed to procedural limitations. More witness statements were required. Some delays, they said, were due to vacation schedules. Investigators downplayed the danger. Because there had been no physical attack, some viewed the case as merely harassment, not as a precursor to violence. They underestimated what was unfolding in plain sight. Her family would later challenge that failure. They argued that the warnings had been clear, consistent, and serious. The progression was obvious. What began as digital obsession had become physical intimidation. Giovanni's behavior was no longer reactive. It was calculated, repetitive, dangerous. And then came the clearest evidence of all. On August 20th, 2022, just 3 days before the final act, Giovanni created a checklist on his phone. Investigators would later find it in his notes app. The list wasn't vague. It included specific items: duct tape, a hammer, restraints. Beneath that was a written plan: simulate a conversation, find a way to get inside, bring the necessary tools. The level of detail removed any doubt about his intentions. This wasn't spontaneous rage. It was methodical planning. On August 21st, Giovanni left Sicily, where he had been engaged in football-related activities, and traveled to Senigallia under the guise of personal business. From there, he continued his journey, ultimately arriving in Bologna on August 22nd. Digital records would later confirm Giovanni's movements in chilling detail. He had slipped into Bologna quietly, informing no one, not even Alessandra. After arriving on August 22nd, 2022, he hid a hammer in a bush close to Alessandra's apartment building, strategically placed in a secluded corner of the residential complex. He had scouted the area in advance, carefully planning each step. At some point that same day, he climbed to the rooftop of the building. From above, he watched and waited, tracking Alessandra's comings and goings. This surveillance was not new. He had been monitoring her for months. But this time, he was no longer satisfied with watching. Weeks earlier, Giovanni had written a note in his phone. Dated July 2nd, it read, "I'll end her because she ended me emotionally." In it, he painted himself as a victim, claiming he had been manipulated, discarded, and driven to the edge. He admitted full awareness of the consequences. "I know I'll end up in prison. This note will explain to the police what she did to me." His intentions were unmistakable. What was about to happen had been decided long before he made the trip north. On the evening of August 23rd, Alessandra returned home, unaware that Giovanni was nearby. It was just after 9 p.m. She was speaking on the phone with her sister Stefania, a routine conversation between two women whose connection had always been rooted in trust. As Alessandra approached the building entrance, Giovanni stepped out from his hiding spot. The assault began in seconds. Stefania, still on the call, heard a sudden shift. Alessandra's voice changed, followed by the unmistakable sounds of a violent struggle. In that brief moment, everything unraveled. Witnesses later recounted seeing Giovanni lunge at her. He retrieved the hidden hammer and delivered a blow so forceful that the head of the tool snapped from the handle. But the attack didn't stop there. Giovanni continued beating her with his fists, then lifted a heavy wrought iron bench, situated just outside the entrance, and used it to strike her again and again. He acted with explosive violence, delivering multiple crushing blows. Forensic reports would later reveal over 20 traumatic injuries. Alessandra's skull, chest, arms, and legs bore the marks of a brutal assault. Her body was found with signs of blunt force trauma, deep fractures, and evidence she had been dragged across the ground. Despite the noise, despite the commotion, he made no attempt to escape. When police arrived, he was sitting near the building's front door, waiting. Officers described him as calm, his demeanor eerily composed. "Good thing you came," he said upon arrest. There was no struggle, no signs of remorse, only a chilling acceptance of what he had done. Alessandra was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. The injuries were catastrophic. She died within minutes of arrival. The evidence left no room for doubt. His actions were methodical. There was no effort to cover his tracks or disguise the crime. The precision, the timing, the location of the weapon, everything indicated premeditation. Witnesses described him as swift and unwavering, moving with the certainty of someone who had rehearsed it in his mind many times. Stefania's phone call, along with the physical and digital trail, became critical in reconstructing the exact sequence of events. The entire attack lasted only a few minutes, but it was the culmination of months of calculated psychological torment. Following his arrest, Giovanni was transferred to a psychiatric facility. He initially invoked his right to remain silent, but later made statements in which he blamed Alessandra for the outcome. He claimed emotional devastation, saying she had broken him. Investigators, however, saw through the facade. The crime had been planned, documented, and executed with chilling precision. Though his defense team pushed for a psychiatric evaluation, the court-appointed experts found him to be fully aware of his actions. He exhibited obsessive behavior and a pattern of control, but he did not meet the criteria for legal insanity. His mind was intact, his intentions were conscious. At sentencing, Giovanni spoke briefly. He called the experience a nightmare and told the court that if they believed he was sane, he deserved the harshest penalty. He tried to cast himself as a shattered man, but the court was unmoved. His victim-blaming narrative collapsed under the weight of the evidence. On February 12, 2024, Giovanni was found guilty of stalking and the premeditated murder of Alessandra Matteuzzi. He was sentenced to life in prison. The court cited aggravating factors: the extreme cruelty of the attack, his lack of remorse, and the extensive psychological abuse that preceded the crime. The aftermath didn't end in the courtroom. After Alessandra's death, a wave of online hostility emerged, targeting her. On social media, cruel comments flooded the news articles. Strangers mocked her appearance, her clothing, her age, and the age gap between her and Giovanni. Some even suggested she had provoked him. Among the most shocking was a public comment from Donatello Alberti, a regional Red Cross official, who insinuated that her appearance justified his jealousy. The backlash was immediate. Alberti was swiftly removed from his position. Alessandra's family took action. They filed complaints against 25 individuals for their online abuse, and the Bologna prosecutor's office launched a rare and unprecedented investigation into posthumous cyber harassment. The case set a new legal precedent in Italy, marking one of the first times digital defamation against a deceased victim had been prosecuted at scale. In the eyes of the court and the public, Giovanni's crime was not just a murder. It was the endpoint of a long campaign of control, psychological, digital, physical, and a tragic illustration of a system that didn't act in time. Experts later identified his behavior as classic Othello syndrome, a pathological condition marked by delusional jealousy. Unlike ordinary jealousy, this disorder involves obsessive thoughts, irrational suspicion of infidelity, and a refusal to accept reality. In its most severe forms, it leads to violence. And for Alessandra Matteusi, it led to her death.
Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.